Hey guys, tonight we step inside a medieval peasant home, and from the very first breath, you realize it's nothing like your cozy bedroom. You trudge through snow-crusted mud paths, your boots squishing with each step, until finally, the tiny door creaks open. The smell hits you first, a mixture of smoke, damp straw, and whatever the pig slept on last night. You probably won't survive this if you imagine it too vividly, because every corner seems to whisper cold secrets, and the thin walls do nothing to block the wind that whistles through the gaps. Yet here you are, curious, eyes adjusting to the dim candlelight, ready to witness how humans survived brutal winters without central heating, memory foam, or even thick wool socks. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, why not drop your location and local time in the comments? It's oddly comforting to know someone else is awake somewhere while we wander through this frozen past. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. As you step inside, you notice immediately how small the space is. One room more, maybe two, if you're lucky, is shared by a whole family. You can't help but wonder how privacy ever existed here, or if it was just a fantasy whispered about by richer folk. Straw mats and animal hides cover the earthen floor, creating uneven surfaces that will serve as your bed tonight. The ceiling is low, forcing you to bend your neck slightly. You can almost feel the chill gathering at head height. Flickers from the central hearth cast dancing shadows on walls of wattle and daub, the mixture of mud and woven branches that form the very skeleton of the home. Historians still argue whether these walls could truly keep the biting cold out, or if winter nights were a constant negotiation between warmth and frost. You can feel the tiny gaps, hear the whistle of the wind, and imagine snow sliding off the thatch above, perhaps even landing on your head if you're unlucky. The hearth crackles, faint sparks leaping into the gloom. You watch as the family shuffles closer to it, huddling together, sharing not only warmth, but stories and worries alike. You notice that every sound, every creak of timber, every cough, every sigh's amplified in the compact room. There's a strange intimacy to it. You can almost feel yourself part of this tiny, desperate community. Outside, the wind howls against the thin door, but inside, there's this fragile pocket of human perseverance. The air smells of smoke and cooking, perhaps a simple stew bubbling over the fire. But the aroma mingles with the earthy scent of straw and the faint tang of dried herbs used to mask less pleasant odors. Quirky as it sounds, some peasants believed certain smells could keep away evil spirits, so even scent had a defensive role. You trudge further in, brushing your hands against the rough walls, feeling the tiny holes and imperfections. You notice little piles of dried moss and rushes tucked against the walls and corners. These weren't just for padding. They served as insulation, a quirky fringe habit that historians have sometimes dismissed. Yet there's no doubt it slightly softened the sting of winter nights. You probably wouldn't appreciate the full chill if you didn't imagine the biting cold outside, the wind gnawing at fingers and toes. Yet here, in this crowded, dimly lit space, warmth is measured in inches of proximity, body heat, and the flicker of a meager fire. As your eyes adjust to the muted shadows, you can make out the contours of the family bed, a mound of straw, maybe a threadbare blanket, and the unmistakable lump of a small child sleeping beside an older sibling. You notice the careful choreography as everyone maneuvers around each other, trying not to jostle too much while sharing limited space. Historians still debate how comfortably anyone actually slept here, with accounts ranging from sardine-like contortions to surprisingly organized layering of people and bedding. You can't help but smile at the thought that even in the harshest winters, people found a rhythm, a nightly ritual of curling up together, surviving, dreaming, and waiting for dawn. And so, with your body adjusting to the stillness, you take your place among them, not literally, of course, but in imagination, and start to understand what it might have been like. The warmth is fleeting, the room smells oddly comforting in its own way, and the wind outside serves as a constant reminder that life is a negotiation with the elements. You begin to notice how each small item, the straw mattress, the moss padding, the flickering firelight, plays a role in survival. It's a delicate balance, one that required attention, care, and a bit of creativity, even from the simplest of peasants. You might even chuckle quietly at the thought that they had no idea about central heating or electric blankets, relying instead on intuition, tradition, and, occasionally, sheer stubbornness. And so tonight, as you trudge through this medieval winter in your mind, you feel the first sense of connection to a world that is harsh, intimate, and alive with human ingenuity. You are now inside, sharing warmth, smells, and sounds with people long gone, and that sense of presence will carry you forward as we explore the walls, the hearth, the beds, and the tiny acts of survival that defined life in these cramped, cold spaces. The chill outside may be brutal, but here, curiosity, imagination, and the faint glow of candlelight make the world feel just a little warmer. The walls of a medieval peasant home are nothing like the solid plaster or brick you reused to today. You reach out to touch the wattle and daub your fingers, sinking slightly into the rough, uneven surface. Wattle-thin, flexible branches woven tightly together forms the skeleton, while daub, sticky mix of mud, clay, straw, and sometimes animal dung plasters over it to keep the elements out. You can almost feel the layers compressing under your touch, yet gaps remain. Every drafty corner reminds you that comfort was a secondary concern. Survival came first. Historians still argue whether these walls ever truly provided insulation, or if peasants merely accepted the cold as an inevitable companion. You might find it shocking that this same combination of twigs and mud could endure years of frost, rain, and wind, but it did. You take a slow step back and notice how thin the walls actually are, barely wide, enough to hide a secret stash of winter vegetables or a loaf of bread. In some homes, the walls weren't even plastered neatly. The daub cracked and flaked, revealing the wooden lattice beneath. There's something almost poetic about that fragility, a barrier that protects and exposes simultaneously. And the quirks don't stop there. Some peasants stuffed dried moss or old straw directly into these cracks, a fringe practice historians sometimes dismiss as eccentric, but which did offer some minimal insulation and a soft muffling of wind noises. You probably wouldn't consider this high-tech, but in the dead of January, it was enough to make a difference between tolerable chill and frozen misery. Light behaves oddly in these earthen rooms. The walls absorb the flickering glow of the hearth, creating soft, uneven shadows that play tricks on your eyes. You notice how every noise, from the clatter of cooking utensils to the creak of the floorboards, goes differently, amplified by the hard, irregular surfaces. Your imagination drifts, and you can almost hear the wind whispering through the lattice, teasing the warmth inside. Some scholars suggest that these imperfections, the gaps and cracks, might have contributed to a sort of primitive ventilation, reducing the buildup of smoke from the central hearth, though others argue the benefit was minimal. Either way, the walls are alive in a way modern drywall never could be. You kneel down to inspect the base of the walls where they meet the floor. The joint isn't sealed with anything sophisticated. Instead, mud and clay fill the bottom gaps, but cracks remain. In particularly harsh winters, peasants might add extra layers of straw or even rushes, trying to keep frost from creeping across the earthen floor. You can imagine tiny fingers stuffing moss into gaps as the wind howls outside. It's strangely endearing, the effort and ingenuity involved. Fringe accounts even describe some peasants pressing animal skins directly against the walls at night, claiming it trapped heat like a cloak. You smile, knowing it sounds odd to modern ears, but necessity breeds creativity. The walls are not just passive structures. They also harbor the sounds of the outside world. Snow scraping against timber, the low moan of a distant animal, the chatter of neighbors, fires, these all filter through the wattle and daub. Sometimes you feel as if the house itself is breathing, inhaling the icy gusts and exhaling faint warmth from within. Historians still debate whether the acoustic properties were noticed intentionally or simply tolerated as part of life. Regardless, for someone trying to sleep on a straw mattress nearby, the wall's subtle conversation with the elements becomes part of the nighttime rhythm. You notice that even decoration, if you could call it that, was practical. Some families pressed small herbs into the daub to deter insects or ward off illness. Others carved simple patterns or symbols meant to bring luck or protection, a quiet intersection of utility and superstition. You might chuckle at the thought that the same walls, keeping out frost, also served as a kind of amulet board, holding fragments of belief alongside practical survival. And when a candle flickers across the rough surface, the shadows make the carvings appear almost animated, a faintly magical glow in the otherwise utilitarian space. As you walk around, the thinness of the walls strikes you again. You hear neighbors' voices, distant and muffled, their laughter or disputes faintly creeping through. It reminds you that these tiny homes were not isolated fortresses, but part of a dense, interwoven community. Sound and warmth traveled together in these spaces, and every gap, every imperfect seam, carried a story. You feel the cold seep in once more, and instinctively press closer to the hearth, realizing how much you rely on body heat, proximity, and the simple barrier of wattle and daub to survive. And so, the walls are not merely structural, they are storytellers, survival tools, and even companions of a sort. You can imagine generations pressing against these surfaces, listening to storms, and finding comfort in shared warmth, all while negotiating the thin divide between life and the harsh winter outside. It's an intimate, tactile reminder that survival is as much about ingenuity as it is about resilience. Above you, the thatched roof looms low and uneven, a thick blanket of straw layered meticulously by hands that have long since returned to the earth. You reach up, almost touching it, imagining the work it took to bind, layer, and secure each bundle so rain, snow, and wind wouldn't spill inside. Yet, even the best thatch was imperfect. Snow would sometimes sneak through tiny gaps, and in heavy rain, a few drops inevitably found their way onto the sleeping mats below. Historians still argue whether these roofs were ever genuinely waterproof, or if peasants simply accepted the occasional drip as part of life. You can almost hear the soft patter of melted snow sliding off the steep slope, a rhythm that might have been both maddening and hypnotic at night. The roof wasn't just a barrier, it was a living ecosystem. Moss would creep between the straws, sometimes intentionally pressed in by the household to fill gaps, other times growing naturally, creating a kind of primitive insulation. Fringe accounts describe families even scattering extra moss along the roof ridge, believing it absorbed cold air or kept the sky from falling on their heads. You probably wouldn't test this today, but in the imagination of a medieval peasant, moss was both practical and protective. Small birds occasionally nested up there, adding morning chirps to the cacophony of a winter dawn. You try not to picture the occasional rodent scurrying above, but it's part of the nocturnal soundtrack that shaped sleep. Inside, the slant of the roof influences how you feel the space. Your shoulders brush against low beams, forcing careful movements, and shadows elongate and shorten as the flickering hearth casts light upward. It's intimate, perhaps claustrophobic, yet oddly cozy when you press your back against a wall and feel the faint warmth from the clustered body heat below. Some peasants even threw bundles of hay or straw directly onto the roof interior to act as a ceiling, reducing drafts and muffling rain noise. This quirky improvisation speaks volumes about their resourcefulness. The rhythmic drip and creak of a thatched roof weren't just annoyances, they were survival cues. You learn to sense the severity of a storm by how the roof sounds, a kind of primitive weather forecast. Historians note that families often timed bedtimes and household chores based on these subtle cues, though it's debated whether everyone consciously noticed or if it was simply habituated experience. Either way, the roof was both sentinel and storyteller, reacting to the merciless elements and transmitting its messages into the tiny room below. Animals complicate matters further. You notice a faint rustle in the straw. Chickens, cats, or even a piglet sometimes climbed into the loft space for warmth. This meant extra heat for sleeping humans below, but also a bit of a smell problem. Historians still argue whether these nocturnal roommates were a deliberate strategy or a tolerated inevitability. Either way, you can sense the give and take, warmth versus stench, comfort versus chaos, and the silent negotiation that made survival manageable. Interestingly, peasants developed tiny rituals around their roofs. Some would sprinkle ash along the top layers to deter pests, while others believed that weaving certain herbs into the thatch kept evil spirits or bad dreams at bay. The blend of superstition and practicality is fascinating. You can almost hear them muttering, "Better a little magic than frostbite," as they stuffed more moss into gaps. Fringe practices, like placing tiny feathers between layers, were rare but documented, demonstrating that even the most mundane structures were arenas of creativity and belief. You take a mental step back and notice the roof's interaction with light. When the fire flickers below, shadows dance on the underside of the straw, creating a pattern that is mesmerizing if you allow yourself to watch. Some accounts suggest peasants actually enjoyed this quiet spectacle, a nightly moment of calm before sleep. Others argue that it was merely incidental, but you can't help but appreciate the almost cinematic quality of firelight playing across rustic architecture. From below, every creak, every drip, every faint movement of the thatch is magnified. You imagine a blizzard outside, the roof groaning under the weight of snow, and the family inside adjusting their sleeping positions, moving closer to the hearth, huddling together as a living insulation. This is life in a tiny house, a constant dance with nature, where roofs are more than just cover, they are partners in endurance, objects of careful maintenance, and silent witnesses to the daily struggles of survival. Even as you imagine lying beneath this imperfect canopy, there's a strange sense of rhythm to it all. The roof teaches patience, observation, and attentiveness. You sense that the peasants' nights were defined by subtle sounds and textures, lessons in listening to your environment and finding comfort where you can. And as your mind drifts with the imagined warmth of straw, moss, and the glow of the hearth below, you start to appreciate how every creak, drip, and whisper of the roof contributed to the strange, fragile cocoon of winter survival. Space is a precious commodity inside these medieval homes, and as you trudge further across the straw-strewn floor, you start to understand just how cramped life could be. Families of 5, 7, sometimes even 10 individuals often shared a single room, with no separate bedrooms, closets, or personal spaces. You can almost feel the brush of someone else's arm as you imagine settling down for the night, the warmth of bodies pressed together offsetting the chill of the earthen floor. Historians still debate whether this extreme proximity was purely for heat retention or if it also served a social function, reinforcing familial bonds and shared responsibilities. Either way, you can't deny that it dictated every movement, every stretch, every sigh. The main sleeping area is usually a combination of rush-strewn mats, straw piles, and perhaps a few threadbare blankets if the household is slightly wealthier. You notice that parents often took central positions near the hearth, their bodies radiating warmth outward, while children and sometimes elderly relatives curled around them, forming a human pattern optimized for heat retention. Quirky as it sounds, some households even built temporary wooden frames to elevate mats slightly above the coldest parts of the floor, a fringe practice that provided minimal insulation but significant comfort for tiny children. You can't help but imagine the quiet creativity that went into arranging these temporary beds each night, almost like a nightly architectural puzzle. There's a certain choreography to sleeping in such tight quarters. No one can stretch fully without touching someone else, so contorted positions became standard. You might find yourself imagining a teen squashed next to a younger sibling, knees tucked under a chin, arms folded in ways that seem impossible today. Fringe accounts even describe families lying head to foot in alternating directions to maximize shared warmth. You probably won't attempt that yourself, but it gives a vivid sense of how humans adapt to environmental and spatial constraints. Animals, of course, factor heavily into these communal arrangements. Cats, chickens, or even a small pig might curl up at the foot of a bed or between siblings for warmth. The benefit is obvious, body heat. The drawback is less obvious. A stray paw, a cluck, or an occasional nudge could interrupt sleep, creating a dynamic that required flexibility, tolerance, and a sense of humor. Historians still argue whether animals were deliberately included in sleeping arrangements for insulation, or if their presence was simply unavoidable. Either way, it shapes your understanding of medieval nights. Warmth and chaos were often inseparable. Privacy, naturally, was a luxury. You imagine older children quietly shifting their positions to avoid awkward contact with siblings, while parents attempted to maintain some modesty. Some households ingeniously hung cloths or animal skins to partition small spaces, a tactic that offered minimal seclusion but at least gave the illusion of personal space. Fringe evidence suggests a few families even built tiny lofts or raised platforms for more vulnerable members, though these were rare and likely only feasible in slightly larger cottages. You notice how everyone adjusts instinctively to the ambient temperature. Hands and feet tucked, shoulders hunched, heads nestled into necks or against walls. The choreography is unconscious but precise, a nightly ballet designed to preserve heat while avoiding crushing the person next to you. Incredibly, some peasants even rotated sleeping positions throughout the night, moving closer to the hearth or switching sides to escape drafts. You can almost hear whispered agreements. "I'll swap with you at midnight. I need the warmer spot." It's this subtle negotiation that defines communal sleep. Beyond warmth, shared sleeping had another benefit, a sense of security. In a world of wolves, bandits, and unstable structures, being packed together meant vigilance. A cough, a shift in posture, or the faintest creak in the door could alert the family to dangers outside. Quirky as it seems, this made communal sleep both practical and reassuring, a human alarm system long before electronic devices existed. You probably won't find it comforting today, but for peasants, it was an essential component of survival. The floor itself is worth noting. Covered in rushes, straw, or coarse mats, it forms a foundation that's surprisingly flexible, absorbing small impacts and muffling movements. Yet, it's not completely comfortable. You imagine rolling over and feeling a stray twig or clump of straw, a minor irritant in the larger battle for warmth and rest. Fringe sources even describe families occasionally sprinkling crushed herbs among the rushes to repel insects or add a faintly pleasant aroma, a small gesture toward comfort amidst austerity. As you lie down in your mental reconstruction of this space, you begin to appreciate the delicate interplay of bodies, bedding, and heat. Every person, every animal, every mat or bundle of straw contributes to a complex ecosystem of survival. It's crowded, yes, but also organized in ways that maximize warmth, comfort, and social cohesion. You can almost feel the rhythm of nightly movement. Someone shifts, another sighs. A child wiggles closer to a parent. The cat curls into a tiny ball at a foot, and the room slowly acclimates to stillness. Even in such confinement, life continues to assert itself. Some children wake in the night, needing reassurance or simply adjusting positions, and adults respond with gentle nudges or whispered words. Historians still argue whether this constant motion disrupted sleep more than the cold did, but you can sense a natural tolerance for imperfection. Sleep is achieved not by silence and order, but by flexibility, compromise, and the shared goal of surviving another frigid night. And so, you drift further into understanding, imagining yourself tucked among them, the tight spaces, the shared warmth, and the subtle negotiations, all combine to create an oddly intimate experience, one where human presence becomes both a source of comfort and a tool for enduring winter-esque cruelty. Every movement, every adjustment is part of the night's silent choreography, an art form born out of necessity. The hearth dominates the room like a silent heart, glowing faintly in the dim interior. You can feel the warmth radiating outward, not much, but enough to take the edge off the biting cold. It's more than a fire, it's the axis of peasant life. Everything, from meals to storytelling to survival, revolves around it. Without it, this tiny house would be an icebox of misery. You crouch closer and hear the gentle hiss of damp wood, the soft pop of embers bursting. Shadows stretch across the wattle walls, giving the illusion that the fire itself is breathing. During winter, the hearth is the ultimate dividing line between life and death. You can almost imagine the frantic rush to gather enough fuel before snowstorms hit. Peasants used whatever they could find: fallen branches, dried dung, even bits of old furniture, if desperation demanded it. Historians still argue whether most peasants actually slept directly beside the fire or merely used it to warm stones and bedding before retreating to their sleeping piles. Either way, the hearth's glow provided both light and reassurance in the long, dark nights of December. It's not a grand fireplace with ornate carvings or brickwork. It's just a shallow pit or a raised clay platform in the center of the room, sometimes ringed with stones to contain the flames. The chimney, if it exists at all, is little more than a hole in the roof to let smoke escape. You notice how the air feels thick, heavy, with the scent of burning wood and faintly acrid smoke. It clings to the walls, to the bedding, even to the people. A strange comfort, perhaps the smell of life continuing despite the cold. As the fire crackles, you see how its role extends beyond heat. Families gather here to cook, to talk, to plan. The children play near it, drawing shapes in the ash, while adults mend clothes or tools. When the day's labor ends, the fire becomes the evening's entertainment, shadows flickering like a primitive cinema on the mud walls. You can almost hear the laughter, the quiet conversations, and the occasional silence when someone stares into the flames, lost in thought. It's mesmerizing, hypnotic even. And then there's the practical side. The hearth sets the rhythm of the night. Before sleeping, someone must bank the fire, covering it with ashes to make it smolder till morning. Too little ash, and it dies out. Too much, and it suffocates completely. Peasants developed a knack for maintaining this balance, knowing that waking to a cold hearth meant a painful morning of relighting from scratch. Historians still debate whether this nightly ritual was a purely practical routine, or whether it carried a symbolic meaning, like tucking the household in for the night. The fire, after all, wasn't just warmth, it was life itself. Occasionally, sparks jump from the hearth and land on the straw floor. A few frantic pats or a boot stomp prevents disaster. Fires were constant threats, and entire villages sometimes burned because of a single ember. Quirky as it sounds, some peasants placed flat stones or damp clay tiles around the hearth to prevent accidents, an early form of fireproofing that often doubled as makeshift seats. You can picture someone perched there, half dozing, the flicker of flames reflecting in tired eyes. The fire's position also dictates where everyone sleeps. You might imagine bodies arranged in a semicircle around it, the warmest spots claimed by elders or infants, while younger adults take the outer edges where the heat fades fastest. The scent of wood smoke seeps into hair and fabric, a protective layer against the biting air outside. It's strange, but soothing. You can almost feel the comfort of that smoky blanket wrapping around the family. Even cooking at the hearth shaped the night. A pot of broth or pottage simmering on the coals would scent the air for hours, masking the earthy smells of the room. The fire wasn't just for survival. It was a tiny luxury, offering flavor, warmth, and companionship. You might chuckle at the idea of medieval slow cooking, but that's exactly what it was. And when everyone had eaten their share, the pot stayed near the embers, keeping enough heat to be breakfast in the morning. Efficient and oddly cozy, the hearth also connected them to forces larger than themselves. Fire was mysterious live, yet dangerous. Many believed it carried a spiritual essence, a divine spark from God or nature. Some households whispered small prayers before lighting it each morning, or tossed a pinch of salt into the flames to ward off misfortune. A quirky fringe tradition in some regions even involved talking softly to the fire, as if it were a family member deserving respect. You might find that silly, but when you live in a world where cold can kill, your relationship with warmth becomes deeply personal. As the night deepens, the hearth's glow dims. You can imagine the last few embers glowing faintly, like sleeping eyes, the soft hiss of cooling ash merging with the slow breathing of those curled nearby. The smell of smoke lingers, the room grows quieter, and time seems to stretch. There's no clock, no light pollution, just the pulse of the fire fading into stillness. And even as your mind drifts toward rest, you realize the hearth is the soul of the home. Without it, there's only darkness, cold, and silence. With it, there's life. The night deepens, and your eyes adjust to the flickering light of the single tallow candle. The room is heavy with breath and wood smoke, and every sound feels amplified. The faint whimper of a sleeping baby, the low grunt of the pig shifting in its pen, the rasping snore of your neighbor pressed far too close. You shift, trying not to wake the entire household, but the straw under your back crunches like dry bones. You live, after all, in a one-room hut, barely wider than a modern living room. And in this tiny, smoky space, a dozen lives intertwine nightly. The fire has gone to embers, but its ghostly glow paints your family in soft orange outlines. Your mother lies nearest to the hearth that was always the prime spot, the warmest and most coveted. You, being younger and less important, sleep toward the door where cold drafts slither in like curious snakes. If you're wondering why everyone sleeps together, well, it's not just for fun. In the brutal medieval winter, body heat was the difference between waking up or not waking up at all. So yes, you shared warmth, fleas, dreams, and occasionally the family goat who didn't like the chill either. Historians still argue whether peasants truly slept like sardines, or if each family had its own bed. Corner, but archaeological remains of tiny homes suggest that the space for privacy simply didn't exist. You imagine what it's like. Your little brother drooling on your arm. Your grandmother murmuring a prayer in her sleep. The faint rustle of hay each time someone turns over. Personal space. Forget it. You learn to coordinate turns like synchronized swimmers, a mass shift of limbs when one side of the body goes numb. And it's not just humans filling the room. Chickens nest in baskets tucked beneath benches. The family cow occasionally lets out a sleepy moo. A dog curls against someone's feet. The idea was practical. Animals radiated warmth. Besides, they were valuable and easily stolen, so better keep them close. You fall asleep surrounded by clucks, snores, and the faint ammonia tang of manure. Not quite a lavender-scented dreamscape. A fringe detail some historians point out is that peasants' homes had surprisingly clever ventilation systems, a simple hole near the roofline to let smoke escape. But here's the twist. In winter, many families plugged that hole to keep the heat in. The result, you basically lived inside a smoky sauna of carbon and coughs. It's no wonder medieval lungs didn't last long. Still, there's something oddly cozy about it all. The sense of togetherness, the soft rhythm of breathing around you, the knowledge that everyone, from baby to beast, shares the same fragile warmth. It's communal survival at its most intimate. You learn to listen for danger, even while half asleep. A rustle outside, a creak of the wooden latch, the whisper of wind pushing snow against the door. You reach out instinctively, fingers brushing the rough wool blanket shared among 3 others. It smells of lanolin, smoke, and life. Someone coughs, someone else shifts. The world outside is frozen solid, but inside this little bubble of straw and sweat, there's a pulse of warmth, a heartbeat of community. Of course, not everything is idyllic. You can't exactly roll over for comfort. The straw mattress itches. Sometimes you feel something crawling. You flick it away, muttering under your breath, just another flea, one of millions hitching a free ride on humanity. You scratch, turn, and sigh. Modern, you might be horrified, but back then, this was normal. Everyone itched, everyone scratched, and somehow, everyone slept. A funny thing, medieval people didn't actually sleep through the night in one solid block. Instead, they practiced what historians call biphasic sleep. After a few hours of deep rest, they wake up naturally in the middle of the night for an hour or two, praying, talking quietly, or even sneaking out to check on animals or neighbors. Then they'd drift off again into a second sleep. You stir, feeling your body follow the same rhythm, half waking, half dreaming, listening to the whisper of the fire dying completely. You think about how strange it must be, living your entire life in a single room. Every birth, every death, every meal, every dream, all within these same 4 smoky walls. Privacy is a luxury you've never known, and yet somehow there's comfort in that closeness. The rhythm of life here is brutally simple. Work, eat, sleep, repeat. You roll to your other side, trying to find a slightly less lumpy patch of straw. Your elbow bumps into someone's knee. A muffled HMMPH is the only reply. Outside, the wind howls like a hungry spirit, rattling the shutter. You imagine it prowling, searching for cracks to slip through, but inside you are safe, cocooned in shared heat and human smell. It's odd how the poorest people found warmth, not in wealth, but in one another. There's a poetic symmetry to it, the kind of thing that makes modern listeners sigh from the comfort of their memory foam mattresses. You'd probably complain if your Wi-Fi dropped for 5 minutes, but here, you'd call it a good night simply because your toes didn't freeze off. Your mind drifts. The fire's last ember winks out, leaving the room in pitch darkness. Someone snores again. You almost smile. It's like the entire world is exhaling, and for a brief, smoky moment, life feels simple, grounded, warm. You pull the blanket higher, tuck your knees closer to your chest, and surrender to the dark. The night will be long, but the warmth will hold. The rooster hasn't crowed yet, but you're awake. Not fully, just hovering between dreams and frostbite. The first breath you take hurts your throat. It's that cold. The fire's gone, and you can see your own breath puffing in faint gray clouds against the ceiling's smoky haze. Somewhere near your feet, the dog twitches in its sleep. The cow shifts, sending a slow ripple of warmth through the air. Faint, but you're grateful for it. You lie there, wrapped in the same blanket as two other people, both radiating a shared, uneven heat. Your shoulder is numb, and your toes feel like carved wood. You want to stretch, but that would wake everyone, and in a world where sleep is rare and precious, that's practically a crime. The truth is, in a medieval winter, mornings start long before sunrise, but before that comes the quiet vigil, the cold hour between first and second sleep. You're not alone in it. Most people woke around midnight, stirred by the body's rhythm or the faint ache of cold. Historians still argue whether this was due to the darkness itself or the human need for cautious alertness, that instinct that something, somewhere, could be moving outside. You rub your hands together, listening. Beyond the door, the world is ice. Snow presses against the walls like a slow, suffocating tide. It's silent, too silent. No birds, no footsteps, just the creak of timber under frost. For a moment, you imagine wolves watching from the tree line, their breath fogging the air, their eyes glinting like twin stars. You pull the blanket higher, hoping they sense the fire scent still clinging to your clothes. In that half-awake state, people talked softly, prayed, even whispered secrets. A historian once described it as a time when dreams still bled into waking life. You understand that now you can feel your mind drifting between memory and imagination. Maybe you think about tomorrow's chores, maybe about that girl who smiled at you during the last market day. Or maybe, in the gloom, you picture warmer lands, where people didn't have to sleep under a frozen roof. Then, as if on cue, someone stirs, a cough, a rustle of straw. The rhythm of shared life begins again. The embers have gone dark, but you can still feel the ghost of warmth rising from the hearth. Carefully, you crawl over two pairs of legs and reach for the fire pit. The ash is powdery cold, but underneath, yes, there's a faint heat, the dying heartbeat of yesterday's fire. You take a piece of dry moss, yesterday's collection, from the thatch and tuck it gently into the ashes. Blow softly. Again, the faintest orange glows back, stubborn and small, like a secret refusing to die. You coax it to life, feeding it splinters of birch bark. A thin ribbon of smoke curls upward, stinging your eyes, but giving you hope. That smell, wood ash, smoke, and survival. It's the smell of morning in the Middle Ages. You can't afford to waste even a single matchstick's worth of flame. Matches, after all, won't exist for centuries. Instead, you rely on flint and patience, two things most peasants had in endless supply. You sit back on your heels, watching the flame regain strength. The room warms slightly, enough to make everyone sigh in their sleep. Your mother turns over, her breath fogging the air like steam from a kettle. The animals begin to stir, their movement syncing with yours, life returning, one ember at a time. Sometimes the cold broke through even this ritual. When fuel ran low, you'd burn peat, dried dung, or anything remotely flammable. There's even a fringe account of peasants burning old shoes, not because they worked well, but because desperation doesn't care about scent. The smoke was thick, greasy, and terrible, but at least it kept frost from claiming your fingers. You sit near the fire now, rubbing warmth into your hands, feeling life creep back into your limbs. The silence outside is beginning to fade. Somewhere distant, a rooster finally remembers his duty. You smile faintly, the day's coming, and with it, the long hours of work that will keep the hearth alive another night. But you linger in this in-between moment, the hush before the world wakes. In modern times, you'd check your phone, scroll through news, maybe complain about the temperature. Here, you just breathe, you exist. The fire crackles, your breath curls, that's all. The debate among historians about Bephasic sleep has sparked interest because it shows how deeply the natural world shaped human rhythm. You couldn't force yourself into a 9-to-5 schedule when the sun itself ruled your life. You rose with it, you slept with it, and in between, you found warmth, however you could. The older woman in the corner, your grandmother, wrapped like a cocoon in wool, opens her eyes. She doesn't speak. She just watches the fire, too. Maybe she's remembering winters from her youth, when snow buried the house so deep you had to dig your way out. Maybe she's thinking of people long gone, whose voices once filled this same smoky room. You catch her looking at you and smile. She nods once, a slow, quiet acknowledgement, before closing her eyes again. For a moment, you realize how fragile it all is. The fire, the warmth, the breath in your chest. Every night you win this battle against the cold feels like a small miracle. Outside, the horizon is softening, a faint silver glow under the clouds. Dawn is crawling toward you. You rise slowly, joints stiff, back aching from the straw bed. The others will wake soon. Breakfast will be nothing more than hard bread, maybe a sip of warm ale if you're lucky, but that doesn't matter. For now, the fire is alive again, and so are you. You take one last look around the room. The bundled figures, the snoring dog, the half-frozen bucket of water. It's not comfort, as modern people know it, but it's enough. The world may be cold, cruel, and endlessly hard, but for a few fleeting hours, warmth wins. You stretch, crack your knuckles, and whisper to yourself, another night survived. The first light of dawn slips through the gaps in the wooden shutters, thin silver lines that slice through the smoky air. You blink, half awake, as your body argues with the idea of movement. The cold bites your cheeks before you even stand, and when your bare feet touch the dirt floor, it's like stepping on frozen stone. Morning in a medieval peasant's home isn't a peaceful affair. It's survival in motion. You pull on your rough wool tunic, still damp from yesterday's melted snow, and shuffle toward the fire. It's hanging on, but just barely. A few glowing coals under gray ash. You add a log, a real one this time, and listen to it hiss and pop. That sound, the crack of wood, is pure music. All around you, the rest of the household begins to stir. Someone groans, the baby whimpers. A low moo echoes from the cow, eager to be milked. You can hear your mother's voice, soft but firm, urging everyone to rise before the light fully claims the sky. As you move around, you notice how little separates sleeping space from living space. There's no bedroom to retreat to, no soft boundary between night and day. You simply shift from one posture of existence to another, lying down to working, dreaming to enduring, and that as something modern minds struggle to imagine. That sleep isn't a luxury or even a distinct act. It's just a pause between labors. The room still smells of smoke, damp wool, and sweat. You don't think about it anymore. You've gone nose blind to survival. You step outside for a moment, and the cold slaps you awake, sharp, dry, and absolute. The village is barely visible under the frost. Roofs sag under snow. Chimneys breathe slow curls of smoke, and the sky glows with that pale winter sun that never quite warms anything. You stomp your feet, brushing snow off your leggings. The world feels both beautiful and cruel, like a painting drawn by someone who's never felt warmth. A few neighbors are already up, their silhouettes moving in the distance. Smoke signals life, and life is movement, because the moment you stop moving, the cold wins. Back inside, breakfast is simple. A chunk of yesterday's bread, maybe softened in warm milk, if you're lucky. No butter, that's for the rich. You chew slowly, staring at the fire. You feel the dry crust scrape your throat, but you don't mind. Hunger has long since stopped surprising you. Someone cracks a joke, something about the chicken laying frozen eggs. It's not funny, not really, but everyone chuckles because laughter feels warmer than silence. You smirk too. Even peasants needed humor. Otherwise, the darkness outside would start to seep inward. Then comes the first true task of the morning, shaking out the bedding. You lift the straw mattress, or what's left of it, and carry it toward the door. The straw is damp, flattened, full of dust and fleas. You shake it hard, sending a small cloud of hay and insect life into the freezing air. It's disgusting, yes, but also necessary. The medieval version of freshening up. Historians still argue whether peasants replaced straw regularly or just piled new layers on top. The most likely answer, both, depending on how poor you were. Some slept on ancient piles of straw that could practically tell family history by smell alone. Others, more fortunate, replaced it every few weeks. Either way, the concept of clean sheets was a fairy tale reserved for nobles. You grab a new armful of straw, crisp, golden, and cold from the barn, and spread it evenly over the wooden frame. The smell is earthy and sharp, almost comforting. You pat it flat, knowing it'll be itchy by nightfall, but right now, it feels like an upgrade. Your little brother runs in, cheeks red, hair wild. Clutching a handful of snow, he's proudly calling breakfast dessert. You roll your eyes and flick some straw at him. The room fills with laughter again, thin but genuine. For a moment, even the cold seems to pause. It's strange. Despite all the hardship, there's a rhythm to it that feels timeless. Wake, eat, work, rest, repeat. The day stretches endlessly, but it's framed by one constant, the need for warmth and the comfort of that tiny, smoky hut. You don't think of it as misery, you think of it as life. There's another small detail. You notice the way people move around each other, like clockwork gears. Every motion is deliberate, every inch of space used with care. You never bump into someone accidentally because you've memorized every inch of the house. You know where to step, where the roof leaks, where the straw dips lower. It's not chaos, it's choreography. A faint sound breaks the rhythm, the dull, slow toll of the church bell from the hill. It's time to start the day's real labor. Fields, woodcutting, livestock. The brief comfort of the home fades behind you as you prepare to face the bitter wind again. But before stepping out, you glance at the hearth one last time. The fire flickers, steady and alive. That small flame is your family's heartbeat, your only guarantee that tonight, when the cold comes creeping again, there will still be warmth waiting. You close the door gently, pulling your cloak tighter around your shoulders. Snow crunches under your boots. The air smells of pine and frost. For a second, the sunlight catches the ice crystals in the air, turning the world into a glittering cathedral of silence. You pause to take it in, not because you have time, but because some moments demand respect. And as you trudge toward the fields, your thoughts drift to the night ahead. You picture the same room, the same straw, the same shared warmth. It's a humble dream, but it's yours. The medieval winter is a cruel teacher, but Juve learned its lesson well. Warmth isn't found in comfort, it's found in company. By the time the pale sun climbs above the horizon, your body already aches from the morning's labor. The fields are half frozen, a patchwork of ice and mud, and each strike of your hoe feels like hitting stone. But this is your rhythm, one that repeats with the same certainty as sunrise and frost. The winter day is short, the wind merciless, and the thought that carries you through it is simple. Make it to nightfall, make it back to the fire. Hours pass, though you don't count them. The only clock is the shadow of the church steeple sliding slowly across the snow. The air smells of damp earth and sweat. Your breath clouds in front of you like pale smoke. Every now and then you pause to rub your hands, numb from gripping the wooden handle. Around you, others do the same, faces red and raw, backs bent, mouths moving without laughter now. And yet, despite the misery, there's a quiet pride. You know this land. You've worked it, cursed it. You understand that every seed planted and every animal fed is another night your family one tea-starve. Survival isn't dramatic here. It's just ordinary heroism. By midday, the wind shifts. You look up, squinting at the low gray clouds rolling in. More snow, of course. You sigh and pull your cloak tighter. In the distance, smoke curls from a few scattered huts, the only proof that warmth still exists somewhere. You trudge home as the light fades faster than you expect. The air grows heavier, colder, quieter. It's not even evening, yet the world already feels asleep. As you walk, your boots sink into the snow with soft crunches. It's the same path you take every day, but under fresh snow, it feels strange, almost unfamiliar. When you finally reach your home, the door creaks open with a familiar groan. Instantly, the smell of smoke, wool, and hay washes over you. Your senses sigh with relief. It's strange how something so grimy, so suffocating, can also be so comforting. The tiny room is alive again. The fire burns, weak but steady. The sound of your mother's voice fills the air. The baby laughs at something unseen. You remove your cloak, shaking off the snow, and settle near the hearth. The warmth hits your skin in waves, tingling, almost painful after the cold. The flickering firelight dances across the rough wooden walls, revealing the patchwork of soot stains and spiderwebs that make up your world. Your hands hover near the flames, and you can't help but smile. For a few blessed minutes, you simply exist. No plowing, no hauling, no fear, just the warmth of fire licking your palms and the hum of life around you. Someone passes you a bowl of thin stew, mostly cabbage, a few bits of root vegetable. You take it gratefully. Hunger, after all, is an appetite that never sleeps. You eat slowly, savoring every drop. The spoon clinks softly against the bowl. Outside, the wind picks up again, howling around the corners of the house like some restless ghost. You glance at the walls, thin as they are, and wonder how much cold they can keep out. The truth, not much. But somehow, that's always been enough. After dinner, the family moves into the nightly ritual of resetting the room. The ashes are stirred, the straw fluffed, the water bucket checked for ice. You spread your sleeping blanket again, already feeling the fatigue sink deep into your bones. Each motion feels automatic, practiced over countless winters. There's no thought, no complaint, just the rhythm of repetition. As you move, You notice a few small details you've never really thought about. The way the candle flame dances in the drafts from the door. The faint glint of frost creeping along the inside of the window shutter. The sigh of the cow settling down for the night. It's as though the house itself is alive, breathing with you, sighing when you sigh, sleeping when you sleep. Historians still argue whether these simple rituals, cleaning the hearth, fluffing the straw, tucking in animals, were acts of practicality or comfort, perhaps both. In a world where life was unpredictable and harsh, routine was its own kind of magic. You pull your blanket closer, waiting for the others to finish. Your father mutters something about how the snow will block the road by morning. Your mother replies that it always does, and yet somehow the road always reappears. Their quiet banter fills the room like warmth itself. As the last candle dims, you feel that familiar shift, the soft transition between wakefulness and rest. The soundscape is the same as every night, crackling fire, slow breathing, and the occasional muffled snore. You settle into your corner, tucking your knees close to your chest. The straw pricks your skin, but you're too tired to care. You think about the world beyond these walls, the lords in their stone castles, the monks in their cloisters, the travelers sleeping under the stars. They all have their versions of this same ritual. Different materials, different luxuries, but the same goal, to make it through the night. There's something strangely equalizing about that thought. Sleep is the great leveler. Even kings can't escape its reach. You chuckle softly to yourself, a small private joke. At least they don't have to share their bed with a goat, you whisper under your breath. A sleepy grunt nearby tells you someone heard, but no one minds. The fire dims again, shrinking to faint orange eyes in the dark. You listen to them flicker and fade until the rhythm of your breath matches theirs. Outside, snow begins to fall, slow and steady, blanketing the village in silence. And there, in that silence, you feel it. Not comfort, exactly, but something close. A deep, ancient calm. You've worked, eaten, survived. The cold hasn't won. Not tonight. You close your eyes, the straw rustling softly beneath you, and surrender once again to sleep. Tomorrow, it will all begin again. The same cold, the same fire, the same hope. But for now, you rest, wrapped not just in wool, but in the quiet pride of endurance. The night deepens again, and the world outside has turned into a white abyss. You can hear it even through the thick silence, the whisper of snow brushing against the roof, the slow moan of wind weaving between cracks in the wooden walls. Inside, though, it's a different world. The fire burns low, but steady, its glow flickering across faces, softened by exhaustion. The day's work has carved every muscle and bone into quiet stillness. You lie awake for a while, not out of discomfort this time, but because your mind won't rest. The ceiling above is just a web of rafters lined with soot. Yet you find yourself staring at it as though it might answer questions. How long can this winter last? Will the stores of grain hold out? Will the frost claim another child in the village before spring comes limping back? It's strange, in this shared bed of straw and shadows. Everyone breathes together, and somehow that sound is more comforting than words. You turn your head slightly. Your brother's hair tickles your cheek. He's out cold, mouth open, a faint whistle with every breath. A snore answers from across the room, and for a moment you almost laugh. Even in poverty, there's rhythm, humor, and a strange peace. Historians still argue about whether peasants found joy in these cramped, smoky homes or simply endured them. But as you listen to the quiet symphony of sleep, the creak of timber, the crackle of fire, the muffled murmur of dreams, it feels less like misery and more like belonging. You shift slightly, careful not to wake anyone, and your hand brushes against the dog curled at your feet. Its fur is coarse but warm, and it thumps its tail once without opening its eyes. You whisper a thank you under your breath. You know, in a way only survival can teach, that warmth is never taken for granted. The fire sighs again, and you think about the logs stacked in the corner, not many left. Each one represents an argument, a calculation, a choice between warmth and hunger. Burn too many, and you'll freeze later. Save too many, and you might not wake up tomorrow. The balance between life and death is measured here in handfuls of ash and splinters of wood. You think of the wealthier homes, the manorial hall at the edge of the village. You've glimpsed it once or twice, light pouring through glass windows, servants bustling inside, their fires roaring high enough to roast entire beasts. For a moment, you wonder what it would be like to sleep there, to feel warmth without smoke, to stretch your arms without bumping another soul. But then, almost instinctively, you recoil from the thought. It feels foreign, unnatural, cold, even in its comfort. You roll back onto your side. The firelight flickers over your mother's face, lines deepened by years of toil, eyes soft even in sleep. She shifts, mumbling something half-dreamed, perhaps a prayer, perhaps a memory. Beside her, your father snores softly, his hand resting protectively over the small bundle of tools he always keeps near the hearth. Every possession here has weight, literal and emotional. Lose a shovel, lose your survival. A faint movement near the window catches your eye. The frost has crept in like lace, drawing delicate patterns over the wood and glass. You can see your own reflection there, faint and ghost-like, pale cheeks, tired eyes, hair tangled with straw. You hardly recognize yourself, yet somehow you look ... timeless. The same face your ancestors must have worn when they too slept through winters like this one. You close your eyes again and listen to the wind. It howls now, a deep, mournful voice that sounds almost human. The thatch above creaks and shivers. You imagine the snow piling higher and higher, pressing down like a weight. The house groans in reply, stubborn, alive. You smile faintly. It's not just wood and straw, it's protection. It's a body around your body. Funny, isn't it? Modern people call this claustrophobic, but for you, it's a womb. Cramped, yes, but safe. The world outside is merciless. Inside, it's small, but known. Every sound means something. The pop of wood, the sigh of breath, the cluck of a restless chicken. Nothing here is random. There's a saying among the old ones, if you can hear the snow, you'll live to see it melt. You remember that now, and try to focus on the sound of flakes hitting the roof, on the faint whisper of their descent. It's mesmerizing, hypnotic even. You feel your heartbeat slow, your eyelids grow heavy. But before you drift off, a thought sneaks in, one of those quiet realizations that only come in the deepest part of night. Life in this world isn't about chasing comfort. It's about understanding it. Comfort isn't the absence of hardship. It's the flicker of firelight on rough faces, the shared blanket between bodies, the promise that even the coldest night ends eventually. You take one last breath, the smoky air, thick but familiar, and finally let your body relax. The fire crackles once more, then settles into a slow, steady pulse. The last thing you hear before sleep claims you is the faint rhythm of it, like a heartbeat, keeping time with your own. And in that rhythm, there's peace. Morning doesn't so much arrive as it creeps. The darkness softens first, turning from pitch to gray. You can see the sun, not really, but the faint light pressing through the cracks in the door is enough to wake you. The air has that unmistakable morning bite, the kind that nips at your nose and makes you wish you could stay under the blanket of bodies a little longer. Someone stirs beside you, your younger brother again, rubbing his eyes and muttering. Then your mother's voice, low and raspy. Up now, the fire's out. You groan quietly. Of course it is. The embers in the hearth are dull and lifeless, only a thin curl of smoke rising like a sigh. You know what that means. Someone has to crawl out of bed and coax it back to life before the cold takes over the room entirely. That someone, naturally, is you. You pull yourself free, feet landing on the hard-packed earth. It's freezing, the kind of cold that bites instantly, climbing from your toes to your spine. The dog lifts its head, watches you, then wisely goes back to sleep. You crouch near the hearth, blowing softly into the ashes. At first, nothing. Then, a faint glow, a timid spark. You feed it a splinter, then another, then a small log. The fire catches, flickers, and with a few more breaths, blooms into warmth again. You hold your hands close, feeling the blood return to your fingers. Behind you, the others begin to stir. A cough, a stretch, a muffled yawn. Morning in a medieval cottage isn't peaceful. It's survival's slow reboot. You can hear the baby crying already, the sound sharp in the small space. Your mother soothes her, humming the same half-song she hums every morning. It's not even words, just sound comfort made audible. You glance toward the door. Frost rims the wood. Beyond it lies a world still buried in snow. But there's work to do, always. Your father is up now, sitting by the fire, sharpening his blade, a ritual as old as the family itself. The sound of metal on stone fills the air, steady and deliberate. He nods to you once, no words. He doesn't need to say it. You know what's coming. Soon you're outside, boots crunching through crusted snow, breath fogging in the air. The landscape stretches silent and white in every direction, trees bowing under weight, fields sleeping under ice. You can see smoke rising from other cottages, faint gray pillars in the pale sky. Somewhere in the distance, a rooster crows, defiant against the cold. This quiet, this rhythm is life. No rush, no convenience, no noise except nature's own. You head toward the barn, ducking under the low lintel. Inside, the air smells of hay and animal breath. The cows shuffle restlessly, their bodies radiating heat. You pat one absent-mindedly, murmuring under your breath. Their family, too, in a way. Their milk, their strength, their patience. You depend on it all. There's beauty here, but it's a hard beauty. Every motion is work. Every breath is a trade between effort and endurance. You think about modern people, the ones who wake to alarms, not roosters, who press buttons for warmth instead of blowing life into dying embers. They call this world primitive. You almost laugh. Primitive, maybe, but also pure. Everything here means something. Every movement, every object has purpose. You finish feeding the animals, then haul a bucket of icy water from the well. Your fingers ache as it sloshes over the edge, freezing almost instantly where it spills. But when you carry it inside and see your mother smiling faintly, a rare smile, the kind earned by small victories, you forget the pain. Breakfast is nothing special, a coarse loaf, a smear of fat, a bowl of thin porridge, but to you, it tastes like survival, like proof that you've made it one more day. You eat slowly, watching the fire. The flames have grown bold again, licking at the sides of the pot. They reflect in everyone's eyes, tiny suns in a gray world. Your father stands and stretches. To the woods, he says simply, and you nod. Another day of gathering, chopping, carrying, it never ends. But neither does life. You wrap your cloak tighter, feeling the weight of it on your shoulders. Heavy, but comforting. The air outside greets you like a wall of ice. You look back at the cottage one last time, smoke curling from the chimney, light spilling faintly through the cracks, and for a moment you pause, because you know that when night falls again, when the fire burns low, and the world outside turns white once more, you'll return here, to this tiny, smoky, imperfect home that holds everything that matters. It isn't a castle, it isn't luxury, but it's enough. And that, perhaps, is the secret that every medieval soul carried quietly in their bones, something the modern world, in all its noise and glitter, has forgotten. Enough isn't a number. Enough is a feeling. Enough is warmth, breath, and one more sunrise. You turn toward the woods and begin to walk. The snow crunches beneath your feet, steady, rhythmic, alive, and in the distance, the sound of axes begins again. By the time the sun slips behind the skeletal trees, you're exhausted, the kind of deep, bone-heavy tired that only real work can earn. The cold is sharper now, slicing through even the thickest cloak. You can see your breath, each puff a ghost, rising into the pale evening air. The sky is a dull violet, streaked with orange and gray, the kind of beauty that hurts to look at because it fades so fast. You walk back toward the cottage, following the narrow path of footprints that's already half filled with snow. Every step crunches softly, a rhythm you could fall asleep to if you weren't freezing. Your hands are stiff, your boots soaked through, and yet you feel something almost peaceful, because you know what waits ahead, a door, a fire, and faces that feel like home. You push the door open, the warmth hits you like a memory. Inside, the room is glowing, firelight bouncing off clay walls, shadows stretching across the low ceiling. The air smells of smoke, straw, and something stewing, maybe barley or cabbage. It's simple, but in this moment, it's a feast for the senses. Your mother looks up from the pot, cheeks flushed from the heat. Your younger brother sits cross-legged by the fire, carving a bit of wood into something that might become a toy. Your father nods once when you enter, that quiet, wordless way of saying welcome back. You sink down near the hearth, palms open to the flames. The heat stings at first, prickling your skin, but you don't move. The ache in your fingers fades slowly, replaced by that deep, honeyed kind of warmth that seeps inward. Outside, the wind howls, long, low, and wild. It scrapes at the door and sighs through the cracks, like an animal pacing the edges of your safety. But in here, it feels distant, powerless. You glance around the small room, and for the first time tonight, you really see it. The uneven walls, patched with mud and straw. The low ceiling, heavy with soot. The single window, if you can even call it that, covered with oiled parchment instead of glass. And yet, for all its roughness, there's beauty here. The flicker of firelight turns everything soft, forgiving. Even the flaws seem warm. It's easy to forget that this, too, is history, not the kind in books or on stone tablets, but the living, breathing kind made of people like you, people who endured, adapted, and somehow found joy. Historians still argue whether medieval peasants were miserable or content. Some describe endless hardship, others point to community, simplicity, and shared purpose as quiet forms of happiness. The truth, as always, is probably somewhere in between. But sitting here now, you can almost feel their truth, not in words, but in sensations. The relief of warmth after cold, the satisfaction of full lungs, a full belly, and full silence, the faint laughter of your brother as he burns his fingers near the fire and tries to pretend he didn't. The low hum of your mother's voice as she stirs the pot. This isn't misery. This is life, pared down to what matters. There's a strange kind of luxury in simplicity, a lesson modern minds rarely learn. When survival itself is the goal, every success feels like grace. You lean back against the wall, letting the day fall off your shoulders. The fire crackles softly, each pop a heartbeat. The room darkens as the last light outside dies. Someone moves to close the shutter. The wind's moan fades away. The bed, if it can be called that, waits. A shared pile of straw, flattened from months of use. It smells faintly of hay, smoke, and skin. You don't care. It's soft enough. You slip under the furs, beside the others, feeling the familiar press of bodies. Your brother mumbles in his sleep. Your mother's breathing is slow, steady, a lullaby without tune. The world outside might freeze. The wolves might howl. The stars might blaze over a land buried in snow. But inside this single room, there's warmth, fragile, borrowed, and utterly human. You think, for a moment, about the world you came from, your world. Heated homes, thick mattresses, lights that never die. And yet, how often do people there truly rest? Maybe comfort isn't warmth or luxury. Maybe it's security. The knowledge that no matter how harsh the world outside becomes, you're not facing it alone. A flicker of the fire dances across your eyelids. You don't bother opening them. The fatigue seeps into you like the warmth did, slow, sure, unstoppable. Tomorrow, the snow will fall again. The work will begin again. The same struggle, the same endurance, the same breath-to-breath existence. And yet, somehow, you feel content, because this small life, lived close to others and close to the earth, is enough. You drift off with the sound of crackling wood and distant wind, your mind wandering between centuries, half in your warm bed now, half in that tiny medieval cottage where peasants sleep, not in comfort, but in peace. The nights grow longer, impossibly long, the kind of dark that stretches not just across the land, but through the mind. It's deep winter now. Days barely exist, a few hours of pale light, then back to shadow. You've stopped bothering to count them. Each morning feels the same. Each night bleeds into the next. The cold doesn't just sting anymore. It seeps, it claims. Inside the cottage, time slows to a crawl. The air is thick with smoke, breath, and the faint sweetness of drying herbs. Every sound seems louder. The crack of firewood, the wheeze of the old dog, the murmur of voices filling the dark. This is when the mind begins to wander. Historians still argue whether medieval people dreamed differently, if their nights, steeped in silence and flickering firelight, shaped their imagination in ways modern sleep never could. But what they do know is this: winter was a season of dreaming. You find yourself staring at the rafters, half asleep, half awake. The shadows above you seem to move, not fast, not frighteningly, but like slow waves. You blink, and they shift again. Maybe it's smoke, maybe it's something else. Your mother used to whisper that winter dreams carried messages, warnings, even if that. When you dreamed of open fields, it meant spring would come soon. When you dreamed of frozen rivers, it meant hunger still lingered. You never quite believed it, but you also never dared to say so. Because in a world where warmth is borrowed and food uncertain, belief is another kind of blanket. The longer the dark lasts, the thinner the line between waking and dreaming becomes. Some nights you wake to the sound of someone talking softly, not a voice of alarm, just murmuring. Your father again, muttering prayers to keep spirits out. The old ones believed that cold brought more than frost. It brought visitors, the winter things. They called them in hushed tones, spirits of hunger or loneliness, or simply the season itself. Not ghosts exactly, more like moods made real, the kind of beings you don't see, but feel at the edge of your vision. And when the snow pressed against the door and the wind moaned through the chimney, who could blame them? You've felt it too, haven't you? That eerie sense, late at night, that the dark has a presence, that the cold has eyes. The scholars who study medieval sleep, yes, that's a thing, still debate whether it was truly segmented to sleeps, they say. The first, a few hours after dusk, then a waking period in the middle of the night, the watch. During that time, people prayed, whispered, told stories, or sometimes just stared into the embers, thinking of the living and the dead alike. You live that rhythm without realizing it. You wake in the deep of night, not startled, just aware. The room glows, faintly orange. The fire has sunk low, only coals now. Your brother breathes softly beside you, and for a moment you envy his steady calm. You turn onto your back, staring at the ceiling. The beams creak with the wind. From somewhere outside, a fox barks, sharp, echoing. It's a lonely sound, that cry, a sound that makes you wonder how any living thing survives this season. Then your mind drifts. You start to imagine what's beyond your walls. The forest blanketed in moonlit snow, the frozen pond where boys once played, the fields sleeping under ice. It's quiet out there, too quiet. You close your eyes again, and your breath slows. Dreams come like smoke, slow, curling, half-formed. You see a green meadow, sunlight, the sound of bees. It feels impossibly real, so bright your heart aches. You walk through it, barefoot, feeling grass for the first time in months. Somewhere ahead, a voice calls your name, faint, like it's carried on warm wind. You try to reach it, but then you wake. The fire's out. Darkness again. For a second, you're disoriented. The warmth, the green, the voice, all gone. Only the cold remains, thick and alive. You pull the blanket tighter and try to catch the fading trace of that dream. It was nothing, you tell yourself, just a dream. But deep down, you know better. Because that's what dreams were to people like you. Not nonsense, not fiction, but a language of the soul. A secret conversation between the body and the world it lived in. Some say medieval peasants dreamed of heaven, not because they were devout, but because heaven was the only place warm enough to imagine. You smile at that thought, a little sad, a little sweet. The night drags on. You drift between half sleep and half thought, between fear and peace. Time loses shape, and in that slow suspension, the long winter lull, something soft happens. you start to listen differently to the silence, to your own heartbeat, to the breathing of those around you. You realize that this darkness isn't an enemy, it's a teacher. It shows you patience, gratitude, endurance. It forces you to feel every moment, to find warmth, not in fire alone, but in closeness, in the shared weight of sleep, in whispered stories, in faith that the light will come back, because it always does. You close your eyes again, letting the world go black, knowing that when you wake next, morning will be a little brighter, not much, just enough. And sometimes, enough is all you need to dream again. The first sign comes quietly. Not the sun that's still shy, still hiding behind gray clouds. Not the warmth, either. The air still bites. But one morning, when you step outside, you hear it, a drip, then another. The faint, rhythmic tapping of melting ice. It's nothing, maybe. A trickle from the eaves, a sigh from the frozen earth. But to you, it sounds like music, like hope beginning to thaw. Winter doesn't end in a single day. It retreats, slowly, reluctantly. The snow softens, the ground darkens, and the smell of mud creeps into the air. The fields look dead, but under the crust of frost, something stirs. Inside the cottage, the mood shifts. The nights are still cold, but the fear eases. You sleep a little lighter now, the kind of rest that belongs to people who know they've survived the worst. Your father says it's time to mend the plow. Your mother hums as she kneads dough, a tune that hasn't been heard since last summer. Even the animals seem livelier. The cows flick their tails, the chickens peck at the floor, restless for open ground. You don't say it aloud, but you feel it too, that hum of life, faint but insistent, returning. Historians still argue whether peasants marked the coming of spring with religious festivals or simple relief. There are records of Candlemas, a holy day when people lit candles to chase away winter's darkness. But for most peasants, the true celebration wasn't in the church, it was in the soil. The first thaw meant one thing: the world was waking. You walk with your father to the edge of the fields, boots sinking into soft earth. The smell hits you, damp, sweet, alive. You crouch, scoop up a handful of mud, and watch it ooze between your fingers. It's messy, but it feels good, it feels real. Your father doesn't speak much, but he grunts approvingly. That's his version of a smile. The river is still half frozen, its edges glassy and fragile. You throw a stick into the middle, watch it drift lazily along the slush. It's almost hard to believe that just weeks ago, the same river was a sheet of death, silent, frozen, still. Now, it moves again, and movement means life. Back at the cottage, the fire still burns, but smaller now. It doesn't need to rage. You sit near it one evening, watching the smoke spiral through a thin shaft of sunlight breaking through the roof's crack. It glows golden for the first time in months. Your mother laughs softly at something your brother says, a sound you haven't heard in too long. You realize, suddenly, how rare laughter has been this winter, how heavy silence can get when all you do is endure. And yet, here it is, light, fleeting, perfect. There's a superstition in your village. When the first bird sings after winter, you're supposed to make a wish before the echo fades. So when, one morning, a blackbird trills from a nearby tree, you stop dead in your tracks. You listen. Its song is thin, trembling, but real. You close your eyes and make your wish. You don't even know for what. Maybe warmth, maybe luck, maybe just another peaceful night. No one around you sees how that tiny sound lifts your chest, but you feel it. The promise, the restart. Spring will take time. The frost will fight back. But you've learned something through all those long, frozen nights. The kind of wisdom that doesn't come from books, but from breath and patience. You've learned that survival isn't a single act. It's a rhythm. A dance with the world, where you step, stumble, fall, and rise again. You remember all those winter nights when you thought the cold would never break, when the fire burned low and the dark felt endless. And yet, here you are, still breathing, still warm, still human. The dog pads up beside you, pressing against your leg. You scratch its neck absently, smiling at the way its fur feels, coarse but familiar. Around you, the world drips, hums, shifts. Inside, your mother opens the window shutter just a little wider. Sunlight spills in, touching everything. The table, the straw bed, the rough clay wall. For the first time in months, the light feels warm enough to believe in. Historians write that medieval peasants lived by the mercy of seasons, that their fates rose and fell with the weather. They're right, of course. But standing here, breathing this cold, soft air, you realize something they rarely say. The peasants didn't just endure winter, they remembered it, because every thaw feels sweeter when you've known the freeze. Every ray of sunlight feels sacred when you've lived by the dim glow of fire. You walk out to the field one last time, squinting against the brightness of melting snow. The ground squelches underfoot. You see your breath one last time before the air warms enough to steal it away. The world isn't gentle, but it's generous, eventually. And you, who slept through its coldest months and woke again to its mercy, feel a quiet pride that no noble or king could ever buy. You survived. And tonight, when you crawl under the furs again, when the fire hums soft and the wind has lost its edge, you'll sleep not from exhaustion, but from peace, because you've seen what it takes to endure the winter of the world. And you know, spring always comes, always. The dawn creeps over the once bustling medieval settlement. The smoke from last night's hearth fires rises weakly through the broken chimneys. The frost still clings to the grass, sparkling faintly like a memory that refuses to fade. You step outside, boots crunching on the frozen earth, and you realize how quiet the world has become. The songs of blacksmiths, the laughter of traders, the rhythm of the old life, all gone. Only the wind remains, whispering through empty homes, through the bones of barns, through the gaps in wooden fences where goats once grazed. As you walk, you remember how they survived, not through wealth or glory, but through shared hardship. The medieval way of life was not one of comfort, but of deep endurance. The art of boiling bark for soup, weaving warmth from nettles, trapping warmth beneath moss and straw. These were not skills then. They were the heartbeat of existence. Yet slowly, generation by generation, those skills faded. Fire replaced the sun. Steel replaced wood. Markets replaced the bond of neighborly trade. What was once sacred knowledge passed from hand to hand was forgotten in the rush for convenience. You reach the old stone well, now half collapsed, and look down. The water's surface reflects your face, but behind it you see echoes of them, the peasants, the hunters, the mothers with raw hands, the children who learned silence under the howl of wolves. They whisper, not in words, but in a feeling. Remember us, because these were the people who built the foundations of everything you now call modern life. Their survival, brutal, simple, pure, is the root of every comfort you take for granted today. So tonight, when you lie in your soft bed, with a warm roof and running water, remember the forgotten kingdom beneath your dreams, the world that froze, starved, and bled, so that you could sleep without fear. And as you close your eyes, imagine the firelight flickering on stone walls, the smell of wood smoke and earth, and the slow rhythm of a world that once survived, not through progress, but through patience. That's the story of medieval survival. A story not of heroes, but of endurance. Soft, closing tone, deep, slow, reflective, good night, traveler. May your dreams keep the fire alive.